Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez makes her presence known. Big Democratic cities engage in big crony capitalism. And the Mueller investigation heats up again. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. Well, brand new faces in brand new places we get to watch as the incoming Congress comes in and, participates in some shenanigans. We will talk about all of that, plus the Mueller investigation and a non-shocking report on a global warming research report that it turns out was being skewed in a particular direction. I will let you guess that direction. But first, let's talk about your finances. So Dems have retaken the House. Obviously, that is not going to be great for the economy. They're going to be involved in attempting new regulations. They're going to be shutting down the attempts to make the tax cuts permanent. They're going to be doing an awful lot of things that aren't going to be great for the business climate in the country right now. And that means that you might want to think a little bit more about diversifying your funds. Right now, you should take a look at Birch Gold. Can you really afford another hit if the stock market should take a serious hit like it took in 2007, 2008 when the S&P dropped 50%? Instead, you might want to think about doing a little bit of hedging. Hedge against inflation, hedge against uncertainty and instability with precious metals. Gold is a safe haven against uncertainty. My savings plan is diversified. Yours should be too. I'm not talking about taking all your money out of the stock market and putting it in gold. I'm talking about taking some of your money and putting it into precious metals because they've never been worth zero. And again, they are a good hedge against inflation and instability. The company I trust with precious metal purchases is Birch Gold Group. Right now, thanks to a little-known IRS tax law, you can even move your IRA or eligible 401k into an IRA backed by physical gold and silver, which is perfect for folks who want to protect their hard-earned retirement savings from future geopolitical uncertainty. Birch Gold Group has thousands of satisfied customers, countless five-star reviews, A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. Check them out right now. Contact Birch Gold Group and get a free information kit on physical precious metals. It's a comprehensive 16-page kit showing how gold and silver can protect your savings. Go to birchgold.com/Ben. Ask all of your questions, get your answers, and then when you're ready to invest, talk to my friends at Birch Gold, birchgold.com/Ben. That's www.birchgold.com/Ben. Go check it out. Okay, so the assumption going into the new Democratic-controlled Congress is that things were going to be pretty terrible. And I think that assumption holds fairly true. I think that Democrats are going to launch an endless round of investigations into everything Trump-related, the vast majority of which will not only be irrelevant but counterproductive. I think that the Democrats are going to hold up the business of government for ridiculous proposals like massive carbon taxes, for example. I think Democrats are going to be just as bad at governance as they ever were back when they were in control of the House from 2006 to 2010. And Nancy Pelosi will be Speaker of the House again. But there is going to be some fun Democratic infighting, or at least there are indicators that there may be some fun Democratic infighting. That was the early indication anyway. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is the progressive leftist darling beloved of the radical members of the base, she went to a sit-in outside Speaker Pelosi's office. And I want to show you that I think that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, while she doesn't know squat about economics, while she doesn't understand politics in a very basic way, she is a canny young politician. She's a lot cannier than she's being given credit for. And the reason I say this is because the headlines that emerged from this situation yesterday in Congress are not actually consonant with what happened yesterday in Congress. So there's this big sit-in outside Speaker Pelosi's office. There are a bunch of people who are protesting, saying they want a new subcommittee formed on climate change that has the power to push legislation. And Ocasio-Cortez shows up at this big sit-in outside. It gets all sorts of press.
Let you all know how proud I am of each and every single one of you for putting yourselves and your bodies and everything on the line to make sure that we save our planet, our generation, and our future. It's so incredibly important.
Okay, so, everybody was saying, well, look at her. She's really going there to stand up to Nancy Pelosi and really push Nancy Pelosi hard from the left. Well, this is much more of an inside-outside game. Excuse me. This is much more of an inside-outside game. What we are watching instead is Nancy Pelosi pretending to be the moderate, and then Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez getting to be the person who pulls Nancy Pelosi in the radical left direction. And it's a good piece of politicking, I will say. Nancy Pelosi then issued a statement saying, "We are inspired by the energy and activism of the many young activists and advocates leading the way on the climate crisis, which threatens the health, economic security, and futures of all of our communities. I have recommended to my House Democratic colleagues that we reinstate the Select Committee to address the climate crisis. House Democrats ran on and won on our bold campaign for a $1 trillion investment in our infrastructure that will make our communities more resilient to the climate crisis while creating 16 million new good-paying jobs across the country. We welcome the presence of these activists. We strongly urge the Capitol Police to allow them to organize and participate in our democracy. In other words, Nancy Pelosi was fine with this protest. She wasn't standing up to the protest. It wasn't that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was there to actually press Nancy Pelosi. In fact, right after this happened, she walked out and she talked about how wonderful Nancy Pelosi was. She said, really what I'm here to do is to support the folks who are here. And she talked about how much she admired Nancy Pelosi. This is a point that Allah Pundit was making over at Hot Air. So I think that this is a bit of good politicking from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who it turns out is quite good at this. Yesterday, she had an entire Instagram in which she walked around her new digs over at the Capitol building, and she took pictures and she showed how there are tunnels underneath Congress, which are pretty cool. And she talked about how it felt like being at Hogwarts. And all of this is hip and young and cool. This is something that Republicans should be worried about, is that if folks like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez turn out not to just be a bunch of babbling morons when it comes to economics, but they actually can take that babbling idiocy and then apply it with some serious politicking, that is a problem. Now, again, I think that Ocasio-Cortez is canny and clever in how she has deployed her resources here. So, for example, she was making a big fuss last week about how she doesn't have the ability to rent a house in Washington, D.C. Well, then she filed her financial disclosure reports. It turns out that she has something like $15,000 in her savings account, in her checking account as of April, and she has something like $50,000 in stocks and bonds in her savings account, which means that, yes, she actually does have the ability to rent an apartment in Washington, D.C. As often happens with a lot of candidates, there's a great amount of posturing about how they stand with the working folks, but when it turns out that those problems don't actually apply to them, they just sort of fib about it. And that seems to be the case with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as well. Now, on the climate change point, there's a big story out today that is going to get very little play beyond the original story in the Washington Post. The Washington Post did cover it, but it's not going to be covered very much beyond that in, for example, the nightly news. The story is this with regard to global warming. A major study that claimed the oceans were warming much faster than previously thought was apparently baseless. There were key errors in the study. This is according to Chris Mooney and Brady Dennis over at the Washington Post. And this does beg a question, which is, why is it that every single time there's an error in a climate change study, it tends to benefit people who say that climate change is a catastrophe? When was the last time there was an error in a climate change study in which people said, you know what? It turns out that we underestimated the amount of climate change that was going to happen. I can't think of a single time. Yet how many times has the climate change community overstated the amount of damage that climate change is going to do? Routinely. The modeling has always been off on the heavier side. It's never been off on the lighter side. The reason this matters is because economic intervention, attempts to skew the economy of the United States or the global economy on the basis of global warming, would cost trillions and trillions of dollars. It would cost people lives. It really would. In developing countries particularly, where they actually need carbon-based fuels in order to survive, it would severely crimp quality of life in Western countries as well. In order for you to make the claim that ought to happen, you really should have to make a claim that something dire is in the works. But the climate change community, instead of actually substantiating that with the best available research, it turns out that they've skewed the research at every available turn. And again, I'm not somebody who believes that climate change isn't happening. I think climate change is happening. I think the majority of it is due to human interaction with the climate. But I do not think that necessarily means we have a catastrophe on our hands that requires a complete rewriting of the economy in a socialist direction, which seems to be the actual goal of a lot of these folks. Here's the story from the Washington Post. Quote, scientists believe a major study that claimed the Earth's oceans are warming faster than previously thought now say their work contained inadvertent errors that made their conclusions seem more certain than they actually are. Shocker. 2 weeks after the high-profile study was published in the journal Nature, its authors have submitted corrections to the publication. The Scripps Institution of Oceanography, home to several of the researchers involved, also noted the problems in the scientists' work and corrected a news release on its website, which previously had asserted that the study detailed how the Earth's oceans have absorbed 60% more heat than previously thought. Unfortunately, we made mistakes here, said Ralph Keeling, a climate scientist at Scripps, who was a co-author of the study. I think the main lesson is that you work as fast as you can to fix mistakes when you find them. Well, the other main lesson is that when you find data that are too good to be true in a political direction that you like, maybe you should take a second look at the data itself. And this tends to happen a lot in the scientific community. Studies that back a leftist point of view are ballyhooed. They are talked about as though they have proven the case of the left, when in fact, sometimes the data is just not right. The central problem, according to Keeling, came in how the researchers dealt with the uncertainty in their measurements. As a result, the findings suffer from too much doubt to definitively support the paper's conclusion about how much heat the oceans have absorbed over time. The central conclusion of the study, that oceans are retaining ever more energy as more heat is being trapped within Earth's climate system each year, is in line with other studies that have drawn similar conclusions. And it hasn't changed much despite the errors. But Keeling said the author's miscalculations mean there's a much larger margin of error in the findings, which means researchers can weigh in with less certainty than they thought. And this has been one of the other factors in looking at climate change. If you look at the IPCC report that recently came out, a month ago, that IPCC report specifically talked about the levels of uncertainty with regard to the level of climate change that was occurring or the level of damage that would occur because of climate change. But nobody ever talks about level of certainty. They never talk about margins of error. Instead, they treat the bottom line finding as though it is writ in stone, as though it is 100% certain. And that simply is not true. Right? The study's lead author was Lori Resplandi of Princeton University. Other researchers were with the institutions in China, Paris, Germany, the U.S. National Center for Atmospheric Research, and Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratory. Nature said, maintaining the accuracy of the scientific record is of primary importance to us as publishers, and we recognize our responsibility to correct errors in papers that we have published. And listen, they should correct errors, good on them. But the original study suggested that the amount of heat that was being absorbed by the oceans was very high probability, 60% above what they thought, which meant there'd be less time than originally thought to curb greenhouse gas emissions, and it drew considerable media attention. But then it turns out that there was a major problem with the research. There was a Britain-based researcher named Nicholas Lewis, and he said, so far as I can see, their method vastly underestimates the uncertainty, as well as biasing up significantly, nearly 30%, the central estimate. Right? This is basically just some guy in Britain who happens to know what he's talking about, who blogged about it. Very often, the climate change community has simply dismissed such concerns out of hand. How could we possibly take seriously people who blog for a living, as opposed to the great majority of scientists who agree with us? The skewing of science for political purposes is extraordinarily dangerous stuff, especially because it does have ramifications for what we do in our everyday lives. It has ramifications for regulation and legislation. And it's not just happening in terms of climate change. It's also happening in terms of gender. And we'll get to that in just one second. But first, let's talk about the climate right now. Around the country, millions of Americans are turning up the furnace for the first time and then spending a week freezing at night. Why? Because they didn't change out their air filters, and it turns out it burned out their system. This costly mistake is completely avoidable by regularly replacing the air filters at filterbuy.com, America's leading provider of HVAC filters for homes and small businesses. You can choose from over 600 sizes, including custom options that ship free within 24 hours. And for people who like to kick the can down the road, FilterBuy actually gives you 5% off your order when you subscribe for auto replacement, which means that you don't have to manually go in and get new filters every time. They just come on a regular schedule. This is so much easier than going to the hardware store, having to special order filters. Plus, these filters are great and they're made in the United States. FilterBuy will save you time, money, and help you breathe better as well. That's filterbuy.com, filterbuy.com. Tell them that we sent you here at the Ben Shapiro Show. Again, there's no reason for you to suffer through crummy air that is going to make you feel gunky inside. It's going to make you feel more sick, and it could burn out your entire HVAC system, doing serious damage to your budget. Go check it out, filterbuy.com, filterbuy.com, and tell them that we sent you. Okay, other areas in which the left has been skewing science in order to reach particular political conclusions. This is an amazing, amazing story. This one's out of Berkeley. So we talked about a couple of weeks ago, the Trump administration making a determination that for purposes of federal contracting, for purposes of interpretation of federal law at the executive level, that male and female mean biological male and female. It does not mean transgender male or female. It doesn't mean people who identify one way or another. It means that we are going to identify you by your actual sex. We're not going to use the made-up term gender in order to skew things and say that you're a woman when you're actually a biological male. And the entire left went nuts. How dare they say this? There was a full article in the New York Times suggesting that sex doesn't even exist. Forget gender. Sex is a spectrum, which is nonsense. Sex is not a spectrum. The dichotomous nature of human sex is the reason that we can procreate. Were it not for the fact that there are two sexes and not 11, it would be very difficult for humankind to actually have descendants. Okay, well, the problem with bad science is that it creates bad social results. And here's one example. A Christian student senator, this is according to Cassie Dillon over at Daily Wire, a Christian student senator at the University of California, Berkeley, is now being ousted from her position after abstaining from a resolution that condemns the Trump administration for considering narrowing the definition of gender. I'm not kidding you, abstaining. So this student senator, a Christian, refused to vote along with a resolution that condemned the Trump administration for saying men are men and women are women. And now the student senator is going to lose her position. The resolution was introduced on October 31st. In response, Isabella Chow gave a statement explaining why she could not vote on the resolution because of her Christian beliefs. She says, "My God is one who assigns immeasurable value to and desires to love each and every human being. In God's eyes, and therefore my own, every one of you here today and in the LGBTQ community as a whole is significant, valid, wanted, and loved, even if and when our views differ. That said, I cannot vote for this bill without compromising my values and my responsibility to the community that elected me to represent them. As a Christian, I personally do believe that certain acts and lifestyles conflict with what is good, right, and true. I believe that God created male and female at the beginning of time and designed for marriage between one man and one woman. For me, to love another person does not mean that I silently concur when at the bottom of my heart, I do not believe that your choices are right or best for you as an individual. After lengthy conversations with many of my community leaders and advisors, I have chosen to abstain from voting on these bills tonight." The resolution condemned the proposed Title IX changes that limited gender identity to physical sex. The party of which Chow was a member, Student Action, then cut ties with her, claiming there are inconsistencies between her beliefs and the party, including perspectives on reproductive health and wellness resources. So abstaining was simply too much. And of course, she got called a bigot. Teddy Lake, a student senator who introduced the resolution, condemned Chow and said, "Tonight was a harrowing reminder of the kind of bigotry that persists in contemporary society and more specifically sits across from me on the Senate floor." In just a second, I want to talk more about how bad science results in bad public policy. This is a very obvious case. I mean, it's really astonishing. So again, a Christian student who was ousted from her seat in the Berkeley Student Senate for having the temerity to say, "I'm a Christian and I can't vote for this thing because it violates my values." And so she abstained. She didn't even vote against it. And thus she was labeled a bigot. Teddy Lake, again, the student senator who introduced the resolution, he said, "I cannot fathom the amount of cognitive dissonance required to make a statement as disingenuous and harmful as the one Senator Chow made tonight. The contradictions present in her speech are frankly disturbing and irreconcilable. Perhaps what most offends me, though, is Senator Chow's outrageous ask that we, as a Senate class, respect her beliefs as she does ours." Why is that outrageous? And the answer is it's not outrageous. But when you believe that your view is fact and everybody else's view is just an opinion, then you get to crack down on them. Teddy Lake says, "To that end, I'd like to clarify that what Senator Chow expressed tonight were not beliefs at all. They were not beliefs at all. They were hateful prejudices that deserve nothing less than the strongest condemnation from myself, my community, and my colleagues. I have no obligation to entertain or engage with individuals who deny my right to exist loudly and proudly as a member of the LGBTQ plus community." Okay, well, this particular student senator never did any of that. But again, when you back political opinion with bad science, you end up believing that your opinions are fact and therefore can be crammed down on anybody else. And their opinions are not opinions, but in fact, simply hateful knee-jerk prejudice. Chow then sent an op-ed to the school newspaper, the Daily Cal, but that op-ed was rejected because it reinforces her original statement, which they deemed utilized rhetoric that is homophobic and transphobic by the Daily Cal's standards. Pretty astonishing. The Queer Alliance Resource Center condemned Chow and called for her resignation. At the Senate meeting last week, students protested, hundreds, and even had a large banner that said, "Senator Chow, resign now." Pretty astonishing stuff. Astonishing stuff. Chow gave the Daily Wire a statement that said, "For me and the church here at Berkeley, free speech is an issue that has been highlighted, but is not the primary issue at stake here. As one of my staffers put it, this is people issue. People who feel hurt and unable to reconcile how the traditional Christian worldview can profess to love LGBTQ individuals while disagreeing with their lifestyles and the promotion of their identities. Even if the church continues to be misunderstood and slandered, our responsibility is not to shout our beliefs loudly above the noise, but to emulate the unconditional love and truth of Jesus." So obviously, this is a hateful, terrible person. And we know so because science. Speaking of which, I do love this story. This is the best story of the day or worst story of the day, depending on how you define it. Apparently, there is a situation that has now arisen in which a school has punished a male teacher for refusing to watch a naked girl in the boys' locker room. What does that mean? Well, it means that, again, bad science with regard to sex and gender lead to pretty terrible public policy ramifications. In this particular case, a Florida school district, this is according to Joy Pullman over at the Federalist, a Florida school district allowed a self-described transgender female student regular access to the boys' locker room with no advance warning to the boys or their parents. Which again, if a boy walked into the girls' locker room and didn't proclaim himself a female, then we would understand that this would be sexual harassment at the very least. A transgender boy, meaning a woman, a girl, walks into a locker room without telling the other guys first, and that's not a problem at all. And if guys are uncomfortable, then that's their fault for being uncomfortable. Yeah, that's not imposing on anybody. The first time this girl walked in, she caught boys literally with their pants down, causing them embarrassment and concern by the fact that they had been observed changing by an obvious girl, said a complaint letter to Pasco County School District from Liberty Counsel, a pro bono constitutional law firm. School administrators forbade teachers from talking about the change and ordered a male PE teacher to supervise the potentially undressed girl in the Chasco Middle School locker room, the letter says, when he refused to knowingly place himself in a position to observe a minor female in the nude or otherwise in a state of undress. Administrators told him, quote, he will be transferred to another school as discipline for not doing your job in the locker room. So now we are forcing male PE teachers to view undressed girls who say they are boys, when we all know that if a male PE teacher looked at an undressed girl in the locker room who did not believe she was a boy, he would be fired and possibly prosecuted. But now this has to be forced, crammed down the throats of people who don't want to engage in conduct they believe would be unbecoming to their job and would cause serious problems with sexual harassment, for example. Bad science leads to bad results. Identifying science with your opinion also leads to bad results, whether we are talking about climate change or whether we are talking about gender studies or any of the rest of this sort of stuff. Well, in just a second, I want to talk about the great irony of Democrats who apparently spend most of their days talking about how terrible big corporations are, how they rip people off, how they harm the little guy, and then they bribe those corporations as fast as they possibly can. We'll talk about that in just a second. First, let's talk about your imminent demise. Well, I hope it's not imminent. I hope that you live another 100 years. I hope that you live for a long, but at some point, we're all going to plot. And that means that you need life insurance. You need to make sure that your family is taken care of in case, God forbid, something should go wrong. Having life insurance is actually a pretty good feeling. It's nice to know that if anything were to happen to you, your family wouldn't have to start a GoFundMe. And Policy Genius is the easy way to get life insurance online. In just 2 minutes, you can compare quotes from the top insurers to find the best policy for you. And when you compare quotes, you save money. It is indeed that simple. Policy Genius has helped over 4 million people shop for insurance. They've placed over $20 billion in coverage. They don't just make life insurance easy. They also compare disability insurance and auto insurance and home insurance. If you care about it, they can cover it. So if you've been avoiding getting life insurance because it's difficult or confusing, give Policy Genius a try. Just go to policygenius.com, get your quotes, apply in minutes. You can do the whole thing on your phone right now. Policy Genius is indeed the easy way to compare and buy life insurance. Go to policygenius.com. Again, it only takes a couple of minutes to get this thing done, and then it's done. And you don't have to worry about it ever again. And by the time you would have to worry about it, you'd be dead, so it wouldn't matter. You'd make sure that you had life insurance all locked up. Go to policygenius.com, and again, get those quotes and apply in minutes. It's the easy way to compare and buy life insurance. Okay, so Democrats like Bill de Blasio, who spend their entire careers ripping on corporations. Corporations, bad. Business, bad. Government, good. Well, it turns out that in New York and Virginia, Democrats are more than happy to dump piles of money, just oodles of money, on top of big corporations like Amazon. On Tuesday, Amazon announced, as we talked about yesterday, that it would split its much ballyhooed HQ to its headquarters between two cities, New York and Crystal City, an area just outside Washington, D.C. Now, lest you think that Crystal City is actually a beautiful city made of crystal, it is not. It is a pile of cement warehouses. So it's basically like if Emerald City were made of Formica. New York is obviously heavy Democratic territory. The headquarters will be located in Queens, and the congressperson there is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, so good luck to everyone involved. Northern Virginia is a similarly Democratic area, and the governor there is a Democrat, of course. So what goodies did Democrats give Jeff Bezos and Amazon for the privilege of hosting their new headquarters? Well, the state of Virginia is going to give Amazon some $573 million to produce 25,000 jobs. Arlington will give Amazon $23 million over 15 years. As Garrity points out, Arlington is actually raising taxes in order to pay Amazon to locate there. Now, I want to be clear. Virginia is giving Amazon tax breaks. It's not the same thing as them just dumping money on Amazon, but they're giving them all sorts of goodies, including the ability to have prior notice of FOIA requests regarding government documents related to Amazon, which is pretty incredible. Meanwhile, New York opened its goodie bag as well. Governor Andrew Cuomo, who is thick as a block of wood, and Mayor Bill de Blasio, who is fond of dropping groundhogs, they grinned through the announcement that the state would give Amazon some $2 billion in tax credits and other incentives. They received direct incentives meaning cash, of $1.525 billion for creating 25,000 jobs, an average of $61,000 per job created. The New York Times also reports the state also offered a capital grant to the company that could total as much as $500 million, right? That's taxpayer dollars going to Amazon so that Amazon can build new offices. It will also apply for additional incentives through existing city programs available to any company. Tax experts said these programs could amount to hundreds of millions of dollars. Both New York and Washington, D.C. can expect rising housing prices, strained public services, and additional tax dollars spent on Amazon. Now, listen, there is no bigger Amazon booster on planet Earth than I. I'm one of the first, probably, I think, 1,000 Prime members. I am a huge Amazon fan. I love what they do. I'm an Amazon defender. But this is not capitalism. This is not the free market at work. This is the government giving subsidies and goodies to a company to draw them to a particular area. And as I mentioned yesterday, there's a great irony in the folks who are in New York and D.C., these major Democrats, New York and Virginia, these folks talking about how big business is terrible and needs to be regulated and taxed. But then when we want to bring some jobs to town, we need to get rid of the regulations and we need to get rid of the taxes. So, well, guys, you know, it'd be a great way to draw lots of business to your town would be to get rid of these regulations and taxes for everyone. Crony capitalism is indeed alive and well in Democratic areas like New York and Northern Virginia. This used to be called corruption, right? This used to just be called corruption, or at the very least, it was considered economic fascism. If you go back to the actual fascist system of economics under both the Mussolini Italian system and the Nazi German system, if you look at how they ran economics, it was basically the government subsidizing particular firms with taxpayer dollars and giving them all sorts of goodies and freedom from regulation in return for those companies doing good things for a particular administration or for the government itself. Well, this is the same sort of economics. It's kind of hilarious that these Democrats who spend all their days decrying corruption of corporations, you know, they have the whole entire Occupy Wall Street movement, they pretend that this is like Amazon's fault. This isn't Amazon's fault. This is the government's fault for deciding to go out of its way to pay Amazon to do things. If the government were not a giant grab bag of cash, Amazon would have no capacity to grab the cash. Now, this did lead to a little bit of confusion yesterday on the right because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, we talked about yesterday, tweeted out that Amazon is a billion-dollar company and it shouldn't receive hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks. And a lot of people on there are like, yay, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, woo, she's on our side. Well, in the same way that Occupy Wall Street was not on our side, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is not on our side. It's not that Democrats, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, want less government intervention in the economy. Far from it. She wants the government to actually take over particular industries. And she's not even against crony capitalism. She's very much in favor of it when it favors firms that she likes. She just doesn't like Amazon. And Philip Wegman of the Washington Examiner points out that Ocasio-Cortez, her website explicitly calls for, quote, the electrification of vehicles, sustainable home heating, distributed rooftop solar generation, and the conversion of the power grid to zero emissions energy sources, all of which can only be attempted through massive subsidies and taxes. And so what we have here, this is one of those areas where the Democrats and the Republicans are not that far apart, except in the size and the scope of the giveaways. When it comes to Democrats, they want to extend the Amazon model to all of their favorite businesses and sectors. Republicans only want to extend the Amazon model to a few of their favorite business and sectors. So President Trump likes to do this for the steel sector, for example. And President Trump likes to do this for the auto sector. He wants to do it for the auto sector. Here's the problem. Government do-goodism means taking money from some people and giving it to others. That is not what we call Pareto optimal efficiency. Pareto optimality is an economic term meaning any distribution of resources that leaves everybody better off and no one worse off. So if you and I make a trade, goods for services, I have money, I need you to do my plumbing for me, I give you the money, you give me the plumbing services. We are now both better off. This is Pareto optimal, right? This has created an optimal situation. But anything that is not Pareto optimal means you are taking from someone and giving to somebody else, and that is killing efficiency in the process. Both Republicans and Democrats engage in this, and it's really an ugly thing. It's an ugly thing, and it's frankly an unconstitutional thing. It has nothing to do with this, with the powers of the federal government. And when it comes to state governments doing the same, generally the original state constitutions were not designed to actually fulfill all of to do all of these things. Excuse me. Well, meanwhile, President Trump is apparently considering yet another shakeup of his administration. A lot of chaos in the West Wing these days. He apparently is going to remove Department of Homeland Security Secretary Christian Nielsen and is looking at possible replacements for John Kelly as well. And those include Nick Ayers, who is Vice President Mike Pence's chief of staff. Really good guy, Nick Ayers. He'd make a terrific chief of staff. John Kelly has been, shall we say, less than great in the chief of staff position in the Trump administration. He's caused a lot of friction and a lot of conflict inside the West Wing. He is not particularly politically astute. And the great lie that came about when he was originally appointed chief of staff was that he was going to be excellent at sort of keeping everybody in line. That obviously has been wildly untrue. Nobody has been kept in line by John Kelly. Instead, he sort of has an agenda all his own, and that has created some friction. The White House has not responded to a request for comment on the timeline, but it would be sort of shocking if there isn't a major shakeup inside the administration right now. I think the shakeup in the administration is going to happen pretty soon. Every shakeup that's happened so far, by the way, has actually made the administration better. So I'm not opposed to the shakeup in the administration, but sometimes how it's done is uncomfortable. For example, yesterday, the First Lady Melania Trump asked that the White House sever ties with Deputy National Security Advisor Mira Ricardel, a spokesman for the First Lady's office said on Tuesday. Kind of rare for the First Lady's office to issue public statements ripping staffers, but she said it is the position of the office of the First Lady that she no longer deserves the honor of serving in the White House, which is, that's a top staffer to John Bolton. So that is, again, lending a feeling of chaos to the West Wing that they just don't need right now. In a second, I want to talk about the latest in the Mueller indictments and all the rest. I also want to talk about the media's complete failure to do its job on a variety of issues. But first, let's talk about how you can protect your online security. Well, look, as a public figure, I'm constantly in fear that I will be hacked or threatened online, spied on. I don't want my emails compromised, my credit card number or online banking password stolen, but it happens to millions of people every single year. So how can you protect yourself? Well, the company I trust to defend my online security and privacy is ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN secures and anonymizes your connection by encrypting 100% of your network data, hiding your IP address. That means nobody can record or access your online activity. Download ExpressVPN on your computer or smartphone, and then use the internet just the way you normally would. You click one button in your ExpressVPN app, and you are now protected. ExpressVPN is great for accessing content from anywhere, with VPN locations in 94 countries and blazing fast speeds as well. So go check them out right now. The nice folks at ExpressVPN have extended special pricing of less than $7 per month to all my fans. So visit expressvpn.com/Ben to claim your discount. Again, that is expressvpn.com/Ben to learn more. You want to keep all your online activity safe. You don't need people up in your business. Go check it out. expressvpn.com/Ben. That's the reason why it's rated the world's #1 VPN service for internet users. expressvpn.com/Ben. Okay, well, we're going to get into the Mueller indictments and the latest on that. Plus, we have some real goodies in things I like and things I hate today. But first, you're going to have to go over to dailywire.com and subscribe. When you do, you get the rest of this show live. You get the rest of the Andrew Klavan show live, the rest of the Michael Knowles show live. Also, you get access to our Sunday specials, the complete version of our Sunday specials. This week's Sunday special features former Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who's just a fantastic person and a really clever, canny, and intellectually fascinating politician. Here is a little bit of what that looks like.
Hi, I'm Stephen Harper, 22nd Prime Minister of Canada. Join me on the Ben Shapiro Show this week, where we discuss a lot of controversial issues: Donald Trump, trade, immigration, and my new book, Right Here, Right Now, Politics and Leadership in the Age of Disruption.
A lot of good stuff in that interview. You're going to want to go check that out. We have all sorts of goodies. Another Kingdom you get early access to. You want to hear Michael Knowles read to you, and you want to watch amazing art, go check out Another Kingdom, but you can only do that by subscribing. Also, make sure that if you are in Pittsburgh tonight, we are speaking, and this is my final speech this year on the YAF speaking tour. We're at the University of Pittsburgh tonight, 6:30 p.m. Eastern, in Catch the Last Stop. We're going to be talking about a wide variety of issues as always. We will do our famed Q&A, and I will be speaking specifically about right-wing and mostly left-wing anti-Semitism. Bring a friend, bring great questions, bring a jacket, because it is indeed freezing out here. Honestly, I'm from California. This is unpleasant. Hope to catch you there. Make sure that you show up. Also, go follow us over at YouTube or iTunes. Make sure you leave us a review. It always helps us. We are the largest, fastest growing conservative podcast in the nation.